Have you ever thought about how much can hinge on a single word? Today, we're jumping into a kind of historical detective story. We're going to trace one word whose translation might have completely changed a core belief for millions of people. Okay, so this verse, many of us have heard it. It's from Matthew 25. And wow, the stakes are about as high as they get. Eternal punishment versus eternal life. For a lot of people, this is a foundational text. It sounds so clear, so definite. But here's where our investigation really begins. What if that one absolutely critical word, eternal, doesn't actually mean what we've all assumed it means? What if the original author had something completely different in mind? To get to the bottom of this, we have to follow the trail. We're going to trace the journey of one little Greek word as it travels through history, through different languages, and through some pretty intense theological debates. It's a journey that shows just how much can get, well, lost in translation. So, our first stop has to be the source, right? We're going back to the original Greek texts. And this is where we find our first major clue. The word at the heart of all this is Aionios. Now, the most important thing to get is that it's an adjective. It comes from the noun aion, which simply means an age or an eon. So its basic root meaning isn't about endlessness. It's about something that belongs to a specific age. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at how the word was used before the New Testament was even written. In the Greek version of the Old Testament, Aionios is used to describe things we know for a fact were not endless. The laws of Moses, called Aionios, but Christians believe they were fulfilled and ended. The hills, they're called Aionios, but we know they won't literally last forever. A slave's servitude could be Aionios, which just meant for their lifetime. In all these cases, the word meant something lasting for its own specific age, not for all time. So this is huge. The people who actually spoke Greek as their native language, the early church fathers like Origen and Gregory of Nyssa, they understood this nuance. When they read the word Aionios, they didn't just automatically think endless. They understood it was connected to God's plan within specific ages, just like the age of the law or the age of the hills. Okay, so if the original Greek was more about a quality of an age, where did the hard and fast idea of eternal come from? Well, now we get to the real turning point in our investigation, the moment the text jumped from one language to another. This is really the central question, isn't it? If the people who actually spoke the language understood the word one way, how did it become the foundation for a doctrine of infinite, never-ending punishment? The answer, it turns out, is all about translation. This timeline shows us exactly where the shift happens. For the first few centuries, the understanding is based on that flexible Greek meaning. But then, around 400 AD, something huge happens. The Bible gets translated into Latin. And the Latin word they chose for Aionios was aeternus, which in Latin really did carry the idea of endless time. This Latin version became the standard for the entire Western world. So now you have hugely influential theologians like Augustine, who mostly worked from this Latin text. They weren't reading the original Greek nuance, they were building their entire theology on a Latin word that meant endless. And here's the difference in a nutshell. The Greek view was about the quality of the age, like the coming age of the Messiah. It was a qualitative idea. But the Latin translation made it quantitative. It became all about the length of time, a duration that just never stops. That's not a small tweak. That's a fundamental change in the entire concept. Now, this new interpretation didn't just stay on the page. It became the bedrock of a doctrine that would shape Western Christianity for more than 1,500 years. And it gets even more interesting because it wasn't just that one word. The Greek word for punishment in that very same verse is kolossus, and its original meaning was more like corrective discipline. Think of pruning a tree to make it healthier. But in Latin, this also shifted to mean something more like vengeance or retribution. So you combine an endless time frame with a vengeful punishment, and the whole meaning flips. What might have been correction for an age becomes eternal retribution. And that's really the key takeaway. This new meaning, forged in Latin, became the standard doctrine in the West. It shaped everything, so when we see eternal in our English Bibles today, we're not just seeing a direct translation of the Greek. We're seeing a translation that reflects the theology that won the day in the Latin-speaking world centuries ago. This really helps us picture that other path, the one that got marginalized. For many of those early Greek speakers, judgment wasn't the end of the line. Yeah, it was a serious, intense, refining process, but it had a goal: to correct, to purify, and ultimately to restore. The purpose wasn't endless suffering. It was healing. So you might be thinking, okay, that's some pretty cool linguistic history, but so what? Why does this one word matter so much? Well, the legacy of this one word shift is absolutely massive. One. Just one word. The way you interpret this single word creates two totally different pictures of God, of justice, and of the ultimate fate of everything. Let's look at the two endgames here. The eternal view leads to what you could call a victory of containment. In that story, evil and suffering are never actually defeated. They're just locked up and quarantined forever. But the age-long view points to a victory of transformation, where the whole point is that God eventually heals and restores all things, actually eradicating evil itself. So in the end, this is so much more than a debate about grammar. How you translate Aionios directly shapes your view of God's character. Is God's justice purely about retribution, or is it restorative? Is God's ultimate victory partial, or is it total? It all hinges on the journey of this one little word. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If a single word, filtered through a different language and culture, could change something so profoundly, it really makes you wonder what else might be lost in translation.